Alright, now this is my second video on the channel. You can see I'm still in unprofessional mode in my bedroom. Um, but this video is going to be about my book, promoting my book, which is World Class Happiness, which I did mention in my first video. Alright, so World Class Happiness by me, Dominic King. Um, the book is available on Amazon. Alright, so before you go ahead and order it, which you obviously will after I've made this video, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about it. Now, the channel's called World Class Happiness, as you know, and I'm going to be providing lots of value about my knowledge and stuff like that. But I'm going to quickly tell you why I wrote the book in the first place. Now, as I did say in my first video, I was a high-level judo player. That was my identity. That was always kind of how I was known, Dominic the judo guy. But I was also always known as the guy who was just that a bit of a nearly man. All right, I got silver at the Youth Olympics, and you know, maybe a little bit unlucky not to go to certain events, like go to the Olympics. I had, you know, a few little injuries and illnesses and stuff that kind of held me back a little bit, but I don't want to use them as excuses, because they're not excuses, they're sort of reasons. But at the same time, one of the biggest things that held me back was my self-belief in my ability and stuff like that. And another thing that held me back was, or people used to point out quite a lot, was that I was a bit too nice and a little bit too happy, I guess. And that's sort of now working in my favour, because I'm still that happy, you know, easygoing, nice guy, and I like being that guy. And it wasn't until after my judo career kind of come to a halt, which was due to quite a nasty illness, which I'll maybe talk about on a different video. I decided to write this book, and I wanted to write about happiness, because I knew it was what it was going to be about. And I'd always been happy. I'd always been this person who, ever since I can remember, has always sort of seen the kind of the bright side of things. Even though I had these issues with self-belief, and I was a little bit shy and stuff like that, and still am to a certain extent, but I've always looked on the bright side. Now, the book come about because at one stage I knew I wanted to write about happiness, and wanted to try and think what made me different from everybody else. And I thought what made me different from everybody else is that, despite, if you like, being a failed judo player, despite, as you can see from my bedroom, not being particularly wealthy financially, and you know, maybe lacking some of the things that a lot of people really want, I felt that I was still super happy. And I sat down one day and I actually thought, who would I swap places with? If I had to, who would I swap places with? Who would I swap my life for? And I initially thought, and you know, a few people were popping into my head, friends and family and stuff like that. Nobody I'd swap places with at all. So the next thing was then to think about, you know, people I knew but maybe wasn't necessarily friends with, and couldn't think of anybody. So I picked up my phone, started going through my friends list on Facebook and social media, and I was scrolling through, and there was some people who I admired and people I found inspirational, but nobody I'd swap places with. You know, people I knew personally and people I didn't. And then I kind of thought, hold on, you know, there's a bit of a pattern forming here. So, and then I really started opening it out to people who were crazy famous, crazy successful, crazy rich, whatever. Whether it be sports stars, whether it be film stars, musicians, politicians, even things like royalty and lottery winners. I was trying to think of absolutely everyone, entrepreneurs. I was trying to think of everyone who people would consider as happy, successful people, who they would think, oh, it must be so great to be them, they're so lucky, that type of thing. And every single name I come up with, I wouldn't swap places with. And I honestly honestly wouldn't. And what I mean by that is if there was, I don't know, if somebody said, right, if you press this button, then you will just automatically switch your life for their life, would you do it? And the answer was no. And I could not think of one single person in the world who I would swap with. And it was at that point that I realised that I might well be the happiest person in the world. And that sounds really stupidly crazy because, you know, obviously there's 7.7 billion people, or however many it is now, in the world. And to think that you are the actual number one happiest is just like ludicrous, really. But there wasn't one person I could actually think of who I would actually honestly swap with. And I come to the conclusion that maybe I was, in my opinion, the happiest person on earth. And I kind of thought, well, that's fine, but that doesn't mean that other people would want to be me. So that then made me think that maybe it's possible for there to be lots of people who consider themselves as the happiest person in the world. And I kind of thought that's what I could write about, because if I think I'm the happiest person in the world, I will just write down and explain why, and then maybe other people will start thinking in the same way. And you know, it doesn't matter. It doesn't just have to be one person. You know, there could be millions of people who all think that they're the happiest person in the world, but it doesn't matter because it's only from their perspective. And I tried to think of a way in the first chapter on how to explain this so it didn't sound so ludicrous. And what I come up with was on Mother's Day, how we all we buy Mother's Day cards with to the world's greatest mum on it. And when we actually pick that out, we mean it, you know. Obviously, other than the odd exception, people who maybe don't get on with their parents, majority of people, if you could, that's good, wasn't it? If you could swap your mum for somebody else's mum, would you do it? And majority of people wouldn't. In fact, probably 99.9% of people wouldn't swap for somebody else's mum. So in that case, you think that your mum is the greatest mum in the world, and I think I've got the greatest mum in the world. So if you can think that you've got the greatest mum in the world, then maybe you can also think that you've got the greatest life in the world, and that's where I'm at. So that's what the book's about, basically, and then just explaining why I think that, and all the different elements I talk about life, that, you know, why I think I'm doing well, or even why I'm not doing well and why I could improve, but why I actually think about it in a good way in order to not let it get me down. All right, so again, just here's the book, World Class Happiness by me. I'm just going to quickly, not read you some, but I'm just gonna flick to the contents page so I can tell you what it's about. There you go, there's the contents page. Now there's various chapters. There are 5 separate chapters. Chapter 1, okay, is the introduction, okay, but there's also then 4 subheadings. The first one is, what does world-class happiness even mean? All right, just so I can explain, and that's the chapter where I explain what I've more or less just said about the mums buying a mum card for Mother's Day. Second one is, if I had one wish. Next one is, life's a lottery. She talks about luck and stuff like that, really, and why I don't believe in it a lot of the time, and how you can create your own luck. And then the next subheading is me. So it's just really explaining who I am and how I kind of got to where I sort of am writing a book about happiness, so you understand who you're really learning from, basically. Chapter 2 is health. And now I think if you haven't got your health, it's a lot more difficult to be happy, regardless of whether you're successful or famous or rich. If you haven't got your health, it's a lot more difficult to be happy, and I know that from experience. So the subheadings in that particular chapter are coping with illness or injury, minimize stress and prevent depression, exercise, diet, and rest and sleep. They're all separate subheadings. And then chapter 3 is relationships. And we've got Love Yourself, which talks about obviously how to communicate with yourself and stuff, like how to self-talk, because there's lots of people who um, very happy or kind of nice and kind, and they appear to be happy, but when you hear them actually talk about themselves and their opinion of themselves, it's not very good, and it's difficult to love and be happy if you're not happy with yourself. So it's just all about that. And then the next heading is family, and then friendships, dating, for those people who aren't with partners already, um, and partnerships and marriage for those who are a little bit more in committed relationships. And then we've got sex. It's just sold 1 million copies all of a sudden. Children, just for those who don't get the contraception bit correct. And then the next chapter is progression, and I think if we're progressing, that's one of the keys to being happy. If we've got to progress, and the subheadings are time, education, work, money, dreams, goals, and success. And then chapter 5 is good psychology. All right, and that's something that I've really studied a lot over recent years. And the first heading during that chapter is the brain, and then focus and meaning and self-awareness, empathy, and social media. Just really talking about kind of how we should use social media to our advantage rather than so it gets us down, which tends to happen a lot these days. Contentment, religion and spiritualism, death, and the last little subheading is your journey towards world-class happiness. And then we just finish with the acknowledgements and about me, about the author. Okay, so that's basically what the book's about. You can get it on Amazon, and yeah, grab one now, or otherwise you're missing out.